The night David threw my suitcases onto the wet pavement, he told me I was dead weight. I stood there on the sidewalk of our quiet New Jersey suburb, the rain soaking through my thin cardigan, my hand instinctively resting over my stomach. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I had the ultrasound picture tucked into the inner pocket of my purse, a small, grainy promise of a future I thought we were building together. I'm moving on, Elena, David said, standing in the doorway of the house I had spent 3 years turning into a home. He didn't look sad. He looked invigorated. I've spent 5 years pulling you along, waiting for you to become someone who actually fits into the world I'm headed for. But you're content with being a low level analyst. You're content with this. He gestured vaguely at me, at my rain streaked face and my sensible shoes. David, I'm pregnant, I said. My voice was a whisper, barely audible over the rhythmic thrum of the rain against the asphalt. He let out a sharp, jagged laugh. It was a sound that made my skin crawl, a sound I didn't recognize from the man I had married. Nice try. The oldest trick in the book. Even if you are, it's not my problem anymore. I've found someone who can actually move the needle for my career. I'm with Cynthia now, Arthur Montgomery's daughter. Do you even understand what that means for me? I felt a strange, cold numbness spread from my chest to my fingertips. Arthur Montgomery, the CEO of Montgomery Global? The man whose face was on every financial magazine in the country? And David thought he had found his daughter. Cynthia? I asked, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. She is brilliant, she is sophisticated, and most importantly, she's an heiress. Her father is retiring next year. I won't be an analyst anymore, Elena. I'll be sitting in the corner office. I can't have a housewife slowing me down, especially one who tries to trap me with a kid I don't want. He stepped back and slammed the heavy oak door. The sound echoed in the empty street. A moment later, a sleek silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Through the blurred windshield, I saw a woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a designer coat. Cynthia. She didn't look at me. She leaned over and kissed David through the open car window as he walked down the steps to join her. They drove away, splashing water onto my shoes. I sat on my suitcase for a long time. The streetlights flickered. I watched the windows of my house, our house, go dark one by one. David hadn't just kicked me out, he had erased me. To him, I was a mistake he had finally corrected. He had no idea that for the last 5 years, I had been playing a part. My father, Arthur Montgomery, is a man who believes in merit above all else. When I turned 22, he gave me a choice. I could take a trust fund and live a life of leisure, or I could start at the bottom of his company under a different name and prove I had the grit to lead. I chose the grit. I changed my last name to Vance, my mother's maiden name, and took an entry-level position in the analytics department. I met David at a corporate mixer. He was ambitious, charming, and seemed to love me for my mind. I thought I had found someone who didn't care about the Montgomery billions. I wanted to tell him the truth so many times, but I wanted to be sure. I wanted to wait until I was ready to take my place as the rightful heir to the Montgomery empire. I had been waiting for our 5th anniversary to tell him. It was next week. I pulled my phone from my bag. It was damp, the screen cracked from when I had dropped it during the argument. My fingers were shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. I hadn't called this number in 3 years. We had an agreement: no contact unless I was ready to come home. Dad? I said when the line picked up. My voice broke on the single syllable. Elena? Arthur Montgomery's voice was like granite, hard, steady, and suddenly very sharp. Why are you crying? Where are you? I'm on the street, Dad. David, he kicked me out. He thinks he's found your daughter, someone named Cynthia. Cynthia? My father repeated. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a heavy, dangerous silence that I knew well. It was the silence my father kept right before he dismantled a competitor. Cynthia? My father repeated. I don't have a daughter named Cynthia. I have one daughter, and she's currently standing in the rain because she married a fool. Stay where you are. I'm sending a car. 20 minutes later, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled up. The driver, a man I remembered from my childhood, stepped out with an umbrella. He didn't say a word, he just bowed slightly, took my soaked suitcases, and opened the door. As I sat in the heated leather seat, the warmth finally beginning to seep into my bones, I looked at the ultrasound picture in my hand. David wanted the Montgomery legacy. He wanted the power, the prestige, and the corner office. He was willing to throw away his wife and his unborn child to get it. He was chasing a ghost, a girl who likely lied about her name to snag a man who looked like he was on his way up. I didn't cry anymore. I felt a different kind of sensation. It was the Montgomery grit. I spent the night in my childhood bedroom, a sprawling suite overlooking the Hudson River that was larger than the entire apartment David and I had first shared. My father sat by my bed, a glass of scotch in his hand, listening as I told him everything. Every insult David had hurled at me, every time he had made me feel small. "He's been seeing her for months, Dad," I said, staring at the ceiling. "He thinks he's his ticket to the board. He thinks she's me." "Then let him keep thinking it," my father said, his eyes cold. "He wants to marry into the family? Let's give him a wedding he'll never forget. But first, we need to address your position at the firm." "I'm done being an analyst," I said, sitting up. I felt a kick of adrenaline, or maybe it was the baby. "I want my name back. I want to take over the restructuring project for the Northeast Division. That's David's department." "It's yours," my father said. Over the next month, I watched from the shadows. David was flying high. He moved Cynthia into our house. He posted pictures on social media, trips to Aspen, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, all of it likely funded by the quote-unquote loans he was taking out in anticipation of his future inheritance. He didn't know that I had filed for a quiet legal separation, freezing our joint accounts. He didn't know that every promotion he thought he was getting at the firm was actually a trap, a way to move him into a position where his inevitable fall would be most spectacular. And most of all, he didn't know that the new CEO the board was buzzing about, the one who was arriving in 6 weeks to oversee the merger, was the woman he had left on the sidewalk in the rain. 3 weeks later, I walked into the lobby of Montgomery Global. I wasn't wearing my old sensible loafers or the muted cardigans I used to favor. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than David's car, and my hair was pulled back into a sharp, uncompromising bun. I had my real name on my security badge, Elena Montgomery. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and steel. As I rode the private executive elevator, a lift I hadn't touched in 5 years, I felt a strange sense of vertigo. I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors. I looked like my father, cold, efficient, focused. I made my way to the 40th floor, the restructuring department. This was where David worked. He was still under the impression that he was the golden boy of the firm because he was dating Cynthia. I walked past the rows of glass-walled cubicles. I saw my old desk. It was already cleared out. Someone had left a half-empty bottle of hand sanitizer and a stack of folders. To David, I had been erased. I headed toward the main conference room. Today was the first briefing for the Northeast merger. David was scheduled to present. I stood in the shadows of the hallway as the team filed in. I saw him. David looked transformed. He was wearing a new suit, expensive, likely bought on credit, and he was laughing with the department head, a man named Henderson, who was notorious for being a corporate sycophant. "So, David," Henderson said, clapping him on the back, "I hear congratulations are in order? Arthur Montgomery's daughter? You've certainly moved up in the world." David preened, adjusted his silk tie. "It was only a matter of time, Henderson. Some people are just destined for the top. It was difficult having to deal with my previous domestic situation. Elena was a good person, but she just didn't have the vision. She was a drag on my potential." "And the pregnancy?" another analyst asked, his voice low. David laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that made my stomach turn. "A desperate lie. She probably got it from a Google image. I had her out of the house in 20 minutes. You have to be decisive in this business. I felt the baby kick, a tiny, fluttering protest. I took a deep breath, smoothing my blazer over my stomach. I wasn't going to reveal myself yet. My father wanted the big bang at the merger gala in 10 days, but I needed to see David's face before then. I pushed the heavy glass doors open. The room went silent. I didn't look at the analysts. I walked straight to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the corporate oversight director. David's jaw literally dropped. He stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. Elena? What the hell are you doing here? You were terminated 3 weeks ago for abandonment of post. Security. Henderson looked confused. He looked at me, then at my badge, then at David. David, sit down. This is the new oversight director from the main office, Ms. Vance? I smiled. It was a thin, dangerous expression. It's Montgomery now, Henderson. I've gone back to my maiden name. David let out a loud, mocking bark of a laugh. He looked around the room, expecting everyone to join in. Montgomery? Are you kidding me? Elena, I know you're hurting, but this is pathetic. You're using the CEO's name to get past security? Henderson, call the police. She's obviously had a breakdown since I kicked her out. I'm here to review the Northeast numbers, David, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. And from what I've seen on the drive over, they're disastrous. You've been inflating the projected margins by 15%. That's corporate fraud. David's face went from smug to a blotchy, panicked red. He leaned over the table, his voice a low hiss. Listen to me, you crazy bitch. You don't know who you're messing with. I'm dating Cynthia Montgomery. Do you have any idea what Arthur will do to you when he finds out you're harassing his future son-in-law? I sat down in the executive chair. I leaned back, crossing my legs. I'd love to meet this Cynthia. Why don't you bring her to the merger gala on Friday? My father will be there. I'm sure he'd love to meet his daughter. David froze. The word father hung in the air like a guillotine. But his arrogance was too deep-seated. He couldn't see the truth when it was screaming at him. He convinced himself I was just a woman who had lost her mind and was playing a desperate game of pretend. You're done, David said, pointing a finger at me. I'm calling Cynthia right now. You won't just be fired, Elena. You'll be blacklisted from every firm on the East Coast. You'll be lucky if you can get a job flipping burgers. He pulled out his phone and stepped out of the room. I watched him through the glass. He was pacing, his face animated, his gestures grand. He was likely talking to Cynthia, the girl who had lied to him. 10 minutes later, he walked back in, looking smug. She's on her way. She's coming down here to handle this personally. I'd start packing your things, Elena. Again. The room waited in a tense, awkward silence. The other analysts were staring at their laptops, terrified to look up. 30 minutes later, the doors opened. A woman walked in. She was beautiful, dressed in head-to-toe Chanel, carrying a bag that cost 5 figures. This was the woman from the silver Mercedes, the Cynthia David had traded his family for. David, darling, she said, her voice high and affected. She didn't look at me at first. She went straight to him, looping her arm through his. Who is this person bothering you? I had to cancel my spa appointment for this. David pointed at me. That's her, my ex. She's claiming she's a Montgomery. She's even forged a badge. The woman finally looked at me. I saw the recognition in her eyes, not as a sister, but as a predator seeing someone who knew the truth. Her facade didn't just crack, it shattered. Elena? She whispered. I stood up. I walked toward her until we were only inches away. I noticed the micro details, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her Chanel jacket had a loose thread on the hem. It was a high-end knockoff. Hello, Cynthia. Or should I call you by your real name, Cindy Higgins, my father's former personal assistant, who was fired last year for stealing from the petty cash. David's arm dropped from her waist as if she had turned into a snake. What? Cindy? What are you talking about? She's a Montgomery. She showed me the trust documents. She showed you forged PDFs, David. Cindy has a history of this. She targets men who are desperate for a shortcut to the top. She finds men like you, men with more ambition than integrity, and she feeds them exactly what they want to hear. Cindy didn't even try to deny it. She grabbed her bag and bolted for the door, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. She didn't look back at David. She was a professional. She knew when the con was over. David stood there, his mouth open, his world crumbling in real time. He looked at me, then at the empty doorway, then back at me. No, he whispered. No, no, no. She's the one. If she's not the daughter, then who? He stopped. He looked at my badge again. He looked at my face, the face he had looked at every day for 5 years, but never truly saw. Elena? He asked, his voice breaking. I told you I was pregnant, David, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt heavier than a shout. And you told me I was dead weight. You told me I didn't fit into your world. I picked up my leather folder and headed for the door. Wait! David scrambled after me, his face a mask of sudden, pathetic realization. I didn't know! I was confused! The stress of the job, the pressure. I was doing it for us. I thought if I could get close to the family, I could provide a better life for our baby. I stopped and looked at him. I saw the sweat on his brow. I saw the cowardice in his eyes. You didn't do it for us, David. You did it for a corner office that was never yours to begin with. Please, he begged, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. We can fix this. I'll move her out tonight. I'll make it up to you. We can be a family. Think of the baby. A Montgomery heir needs a father. He has a father, I said, looking at him one last time. His name is Arthur Montgomery, and he's waiting for me in his office. You, on the other hand, have a meeting with HR. Your termination papers are already signed. You can't fire me, David shouted, his arrogance making a final, desperate stand. I have a contract. I'm the oversight director, David. I can do whatever I want. And right now, I want you out of my building. I walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of the department he thought he had conquered. But as I rode the elevator down, I didn't feel the victory I expected. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my stomach. I leaned against the glass, my hand clutching my stomach. Not now. Please, not now. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, but before I could take a step, the world tilted. The bright lights of the lobby blurred into a kaleidoscope of white and gray. The last thing I heard was the sound of my father's voice screaming my name from across the marble floor. The hospital smelled of sterilized air and old fear. I woke up to the rhythmic, comforting beep of a heart monitor. For a panicked second, I thought it was mine. Then I felt the weight of my father's hand on my arm and the steady, separate pulse of the ultrasound monitor beside the bed. The baby is fine, Elena, my father said, his voice unusually thick. Stress-induced syncope. The doctors say you need bed rest for at least a week. I looked at the white ceiling. It was as blank as my future with David used to be. I can't rest yet, Dad. The merger gala is in 3 days. David thinks he's lost a girlfriend. He needs to realize he's lost his entire life. My father sighed, but I saw the familiar glint of pride in his eyes. He's been calling the office. He even tried to come here. Security handled it. Let him come to the gala, I said, my voice cold and focused. I want him to see the world he thought he was entitled to. I want him to see it from the outside. The next 3 days were a blur of bed rest and quiet planning. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't check social media. I lived in a cocoon of silk sheets and the fluttering kicks of my son. I thought about the house in New Jersey, the one David had thrown me out of. My father's lawyers had already discovered that David had taken out a second mortgage on it to buy Cindy's engagement ring. He was already drowning in debt he couldn't pay. The night of the gala arrived. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was bathed in amber light. It was the pinnacle of New York society, the kind of room where a single conversation could move the stock market. I arrived in a black velvet gown that draped elegantly over my bump. I wore the Montgomery family emeralds. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't hiding. I was Elena Montgomery, the heir to the empire. I stood on the mezzanine, watching the crowd below, and then I saw him. David was at the entrance, arguing with the security guards. He looked frantic. His suit was wrinkled, the suit of a man who had been living out of a suitcase for 3 days. He was holding an old invitation, probably one he'd swiped from his desk before he was escorted out. "Let him in," I whispered to the head of security through my earpiece. I watched as David straightened his tie, a pathetic spark of hope returning to his face. He scanned the room, looking for Arthur. He still thought he could explain. He still thought he could charm his way back into the fold. He spotted my father near the stage and began to push through the crowd. I started my descent down the grand staircase. The room went quiet. It started as a murmur near the back and moved forward like a wave. People recognized me. They recognized the Montgomery jawline, the way I carried myself. They saw the bump, the emeralds, and the raw power. David stopped dead in his tracks. He was halfway across the floor, looking up at me. His face went through dozen emotions in 5 seconds of shock, confusion, terror, and finally a deep, soul-crushing shame. I reached the bottom step. My father walked over and took my hand, leading me to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," my father said, his voice echoing off the ancient stone walls. "Tonight is more than a merger. It is about the future of Montgomery Global, and I am proud to announce that my daughter, Elena Montgomery, will be taking over as the executive vice president of the Northeast Division, effective immediately." The applause was deafening. David stood in the center of the room, an island of failure in a sea of success. He looked small. He looked like the dead weight he had accused me of being. I caught his eye. I didn't glare. I didn't smirk. I just looked at him with the cold indifference one might show a stranger on the street. After the speeches, David tried to approach me. He was blocked by two of my father's largest security guards, but I signaled for them to let him pass. Just once. "David!" he gasped, his voice cracked and desperate. I I made a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake. I was blind. I was caught up in the pressure. Please, for the sake of our child, tell your father to give me another chance. I have nothing left. The bank is foreclosing on the house. Cindy took everything I had left. I looked at the micro details of his collapse, the way his hands shook, the sweat staining his collar, the way he wouldn't look at my stomach. "The house was never yours to mortgage, David. My father bought that house as a wedding gift for me. He held the deed in a trust. Your second mortgage was fraudulent. The bank isn't just foreclosing, they're filing criminal charges." David's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the edge of a high-top table to stay upright. "Criminal charges? Elena, no! You'll go to prison. You can't let your baby's father go to prison." "You told me that night in the rain that the baby wasn't your problem. You told me you were destined for the top. Well, David, this is the top. How does it look from down there?" I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "My father didn't just fire you. He's initiated a clawback of every bonus you've earned in the last 3 years based on the margin fraud I discovered. You don't just have nothing, you owe this company $400,000. You'll be lucky if you can afford a public defender." I signaled to the guards. "Get him out of here. He's trespassing." As they led him away, one arm each, his feet dragging slightly on the marble, the room returned to its steady hum of luxury. No one noticed his exit. No one cared. He was a footnote in a story he thought he was writing. My father walked up to me, handing me a glass of sparkling cider. "You okay, Elena?" I looked at the crowded room, at the bright future ahead of me, and felt the steady, strong heartbeat of the life growing inside me. I realized that the rain on the sidewalk that night hadn't been an ending. It had been a washing away of everything that wasn't real. "I'm fine, Dad," I said, taking a sip. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." I looked at the heavy oak doors of the museum, the same doors David had just been thrown through. He wanted a seat in the corner office. He wanted to marry into the family. He got exactly what he deserved, to be remembered only as the man who was foolish enough to walk away from a Montgomery. I turned back to the gala, the emeralds on my neck feeling light as air. David was right in one thing. Some people are destined for the top. He just didn't realize that the top is a very lonely place when you have to climb over the people who loved you to get there.
Every story we share here is a piece of a lived truth, finally whispered out loud. If today's journey resonated with you, please subscribe to Quiet Drama Stories and leave a like. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your support ensures that these quiet voices are finally heard. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are never as alone as you feel. See you in the next story.